Take the opportunity to extend a very big thank you for all those who made this conference possible. We would like to recognize our partner, the University of Washington Alliance, who significantly supported our conference this year. Here we have all of the organizations, our tribal partners, and individuals who took the time to share with us over the past 2 days. Thank you so very much on behalf of DCYF's Office of Tribal Relations. We greatly value each and every presenter who joined us this year. We want to thank you also for the participants who engaged and connected with us over these past 2 days. We know it's not always easy to take time from workloads to participate in learning opportunities like our ICYF conference. We're just so grateful and glad that you could join us here today. And we want to also give a big shout out to Rachel Mason, the Office of Tribal Relations training coordinator, who put this whole conference together. She made it so easy for all of us to know when to show up and what to say and what our participation looks like. It was just such an excellent job, and want to thank her so very much for her work. And we also had an ICYF planning committee who we couldn't have done this without. All of our many volunteers who are helping run our sessions and making sure our conference flows without interruption. So thank you to everybody for all of your help. Okay, I've been excited about all of our presentations, but I am very excited and honored to introduce our closing keynote, Tanea Winder. Tanea is an author, singer, motivational speaker, and teaching artist who comes from an intertribal lineage of the Southern Ute, Pyramid Lake Paiute, and the Duckwater Shoshone Nations, where she's an enrolled citizen. Tanea's performances and talks emphasize the importance of heart work. Everyone has a gift to help heal the world. She featured on a TEDx Albuquerque. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in poetry and world literature reviews, among others. Her published poetry collections include words like Love, Why Storms Are Named After People, and Bullets Remain Nameless, and Words to Love By. So with that, I would love to turn this over to Tanea to begin our closing keynote and closing out our ICYF conference.
Thank you so much, Cassie, and everyone. I'm so grateful to be here today to be able to share a little bit with you all. Just some more about heart work and some more about storytelling. So I'm going to share with you all, and there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end too. Got a special treat. I'll be playing some music at the end as well too. But again, just going to talk a little bit about heart work and unlocking the power of self-care as community care, and hoping to just really dive into a little bit of some of the stories. And I was listening a little bit earlier, I heard you all talk about ancestral trauma and historical trauma, and that some of that will come up a little bit in my talk as well too. So just a little heads up there, because I think it weaves into a lot of my self-care practices in terms of just music and art and these different outlets, I guess, for all the different inlets that come to us in life. You know, once I had a massage done in Boulder, Colorado, and the massage, I think it was like a sports massage, but he was just like, "Have you been in an accident?" And I was like, "Whoa!" Like I'd been in a car accident like several years ago, not anything recently. And what he said always sticks with me. He said the trauma came into you, but it never moved through you or went through you. And I was just like, wow, like the fact that this man could just tell with my body that I had that trauma and that it hadn't moved through me, all is just a metaphor, right? For like the things that happen to us that aren't just physical, but emotional as well. So I'll be going into a little bit of how I've been able to navigate my journey and how I think taking care of my heart and mind and body and spirit has led to me helping take care others. So I always like to start with my talks just sharing this saying, and to just ground us too. I know we're all in the virtual space, and just get cozy, get comfortable, and just to remind ourselves that it is a good day. The way you say this in the Ute language is tu te veak. Um, I remember there was a time where I wasn't able to introduce myself in my language. I wasn't able to even know that phrase, like tu te veak. And I used to feel such shame about that, right? And it took me a long time, honestly, until probably my early 30s, until I realized that that shame wasn't mine to carry, that that shame is what colonization and assimilation wanted me to feel, because that's what they wanted our ancestors to feel in boarding school, right? Our mothers, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our uncles, our aunties, because in boarding school, they taught them, not to speak their language, or that speaking their language, praying their prayers, doing all of the things that we do, that that wasn't worthy of anything, that that wasn't something worth celebrating or holding on to. So they put that shame in our relatives. And some of us still carry that shame, and it manifests in different ways. I know for me, once I had that realization, I was able to let go of that shame. So some of these lessons in self-care and community care come with time and patience, right? Because I'm sure I had heard friends say something like that, but it wasn't until I could embody it or feel it in my body that I was able to release that shame. But then, of course, came anger, right? Anger that my language was stolen from me, and then sadness. But then using that to move through it, again, to move through that trauma, to say, okay, I'm going to learn, even if all I know is how to introduce myself and that phrase to Teveyak right now, that's something that I can honor my ancestors' strength and resilience by honoring the day, the breath of life, the grace of Creator that we each woke up today and are here sharing space. So I wanted to just start with that, just teaching for you all too, because today will be about hearing some things and how they can move through us. So if you're sitting and you want to stand, if you've got your cameras off, you can, but I always invite like a stretch break at the beginning of my talks, and encourage people to find your superhero pose. I put little examples there. I know I'm going to stay seated, but I'll just do my little stretch. And I like to do this for so many reasons. This is my self-care, hopefully gift or tip to you is I will do a superhero pose every morning, because sometimes the work is hard, right? And we don't always have loved ones or coworkers or colleagues who can always be there to uplift us. This is a beautiful space where I can tell, and it feels like you all uplift each other, but sometimes people get busy or dealing with their own things and their burnout. So why not like help pump yourself up every day? Yes, yes. Thank you, Tashina. Yeah, encouraging youth to do it, because it works multiple ways, right? You can find a TED Talk on it actually, where you literally can trick your brain into being more confident by doing like certain power poses. So it's nice to do before a meeting or before a performance, or like before a test if you're a young person, or now if you're going back to school and in tests. I do this every day to just remind myself. Maybe I should change it to warrior pose, right? Put some warriors on there instead of just superheroes. But in this way, it can be like that protection too, in addition to prayer or other things, like literally putting on your armor. And if finding a superhero pose helps you remember that, to do it. And of course, there are days where we don't feel like superheroes, right? Like sometimes the words people say or the comments, things like just get to us and drain us. So I always say, if you can't find your superhero pose, find your Care Bear stare. This one is really easy to do after you've had a big breakfast or a big lunch, because you're already primed. But I like this one as well, because I really do believe like each of us has gifts, each of us has a light, each of us has a medicine that is uniquely yours, that creator, higher power, the universe, whatever you believe, like put into you, that only you can do in your way, in your vessel, in your body, to connect with people, to advocate. So don't forget that you have that light, and you can use those tools, again, whether it's finding your superhero pose or your Care Bear stare, because each of you here in this Zoom room, in this virtual space that our moderators and facilitators and planners have put together for us. Like, it is a sacred space for connection, and to honor that as well, because you are superheroes, you are warriors, you do have medicine, you do have that Care Bear light, and to not forget it. And so I want to remind you of that today. You know, sometimes in our work, we might hear people push back against this concept of self-care. And I know this space doesn't, because, you know, that was what I was invited to speak about as well. But there are places, sometimes even our own families or relatives, who are like, oh, self-care. And it's come to have this connotation of like, it's just yoga, or it's just exercise. All those things are important. Like, we have to take care of our bodies, and we need to relax our nervous systems, right? You know, like having a massage or having a pedicure, like, to not let people come at us with judgment if that is what your self-care is, because when we're doing the work of working with other people in systems that we can't always control, it does heighten our nervous system. That's why some of us end up with high blood pressure or diabetes or other things. You know, I've had colleagues who've gotten oh geez, I always just see commercials about it. But when like your skin like becomes so tender to touch, like things that are come from our nervous systems not being regulated. So self-care is so important. And it is those things, but it also can be like therapy, as you all know. It can be just doing that inner healing work. And what I tell people when they try to say, oh, we don't have time for that, I like to share this quote. It's by this Black activist therapist, Prentice Hemphill. They have this book that just came out. It's called What It Takes to Heal. And this quote in it says, over time, I have come to understand that social transformation, the push for more just systems and policies, and personal transformation, healing our own trauma and reshaping our relationships, have to happen together. Social transformation and personal transformation have to happen together. Not one or the other, but both. We neglect ourselves or our growth in our rush to change what is external. When we do, we fracture and succumb to what we are unwilling to face. So there's some of us, you know, who really want and push for that social transformation, you know, more justice, more just systems, more just policies. How can we focus on ourselves when there's all these things in our community, all these things in our workplace that need to be addressed, all these things in our society? But I feel like what Prentice is saying, and what I believe as well, is that so many of these social movements collapse or fall, or even if we think about that classic crabs in a barrel thing, those happen because we're pushing just for that social transformation, but not the personal transformation as well. Like, it's inevitable as we're working on helping others heal. Of course, we're going to have to be healing ourselves as well. There's a quote that I always rely on by this First Nations author, Richard Van Camp. The quote is from his book, The Lesser Blessed. It says, I have to tell you something, I said. I'm not going to lie. I have to tell you, I have this God-shaped hole in my heart, and I think you do too. I think so many of us could potentially resonate with that, right? Maybe it's not a God-shaped hole, maybe it's a creator-shaped hole or a universe-shaped hole. And the way that hole presents itself, and you might see this, you probably do see it in people you work with and support as well. But that God-shaped hole, that creator-shaped hole can present in many ways. You know, for some people, it's that negative self-talk, those original like wounds of, I'm not good enough, or I'm unworthy, I'm not smart enough, I'm unlovable, I don't belong. You know, it goes on and on. For our younger ones, it might be, well, they said I'm fat, or somebody said I was ugly. You know, somebody said like I don't deserve to be taken care of. And that becomes like that hole. And many of us, when you have a hole, right? Like you see a hole, you want to fill it with something. When we're lucky and we get people those positive outlets, they can try to fill it with exercise or walking or music or meditation or sports. But if we're not taught those things, we might try to fill that emptiness, that hole, with unhealthy coping mechanisms. I'll just speak for myself, like some of those, have been drinking or drugs or unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friendships, like toxic relationships. And then for me, as I worked on my healing and I stopped drinking, found my sobriety, I started filling that God-shaped hole with other things that I thought were healthy, but maybe weren't, like being a workaholic, just replaced one addiction with another. And even though I was doing good work, it still was in service of filling that place of not enoughness, of that God-shaped hole. So I'm going to share a little bit in like that vein of self-care, just some of the ways I've tended to my God-shaped hole, my creator-shaped hole. And there are these different guideposts, which are words as seeds, heart first, and heart work. And I'm going to walk you through them. Anything I share in my talk as well, any technique, if there's any prompts, like feel free to take it, use it, modify it. You don't have to credit me or say anything like that. Like I really do believe our communal knowledge, our shared knowledge is what makes us stronger. And that's how our ancestors and relatives did it, right? It's only in this age of TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff. Like we want to be tagged and have ownership of things, but we don't have to do that. So words as seeds. My mother always said we have to think of our words like seeds. You have to be careful of the words you say, the words you speak, the words you think. Because once you speak it or think it, you are giving life to it, right? I think another way of thinking about it is just like that battle of the mind, right? Like controlling our thoughts or like letting go of those negative self-talk and choosing to plant seeds of positivity. My mother says this even to this day now. Sometimes I'll call and do what I think is like healthily vent, but my mom's like, no, don't speak negatively over those people. Send them love, send them love. You don't want to plant any negative seeds. When I'm working with our younger relatives, I kind of phrase it in terms of bullying. I say our words are seeds. You might out of frustration tell somebody they're ugly or they're stupid, and then you might go off to recess, go off to play, forget you said anything. But that person, they're going to be thinking those negative things about themselves. They're going to go to recess and maybe not play with anyone or maybe not eat lunch because you told them they're ugly. You planted that seed. So we have to be really careful of the words we say because we're planting seeds in other people's lives. I know some of us in our professional lives, we might experience this as those microaggressions, right? Somebody might say we're incompetent in a moment of frustration, or they might not trust us with a project and trust somebody else just because of how we present, how we look. I don't know. But those like subconsciously plant seeds as well. And we have to be really careful not to let those seeds take root in our lives. For those of us who are really good at like regulating our nervous system and regulating our emotions so we don't speak from that place, and so we're really good at not, planting negative seeds in other people's lives. I think the biggest struggle is to not plant them in our own lives. Like that's a big form of self-care, is like having positive things to say over ourselves. Because those wounded parts of us, right? Like our mind, if deep down our soul wound is thinking, our God-shaped hole is telling us, I'm not good enough, I'm not unworthy. We might not say to ourselves, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, but we might not apply for that grant, or we might not apply for that promotion, or we might not want to apply to get those extra resources because deep down we're thinking, I'm not going to get it. And what's underneath that is like, I'm not good enough, or I'm unworthy. I don't deserve this opportunity. So the mind, the mind of our God-shaped hole, like the spirit of that God-shaped hole, sometimes it can be really strong to try to prevent us from planting more positive seeds to help bring that healing in the world. So I'm going to share an example of how this played out with a friend of mine, my best friend when we were in third grade. So when I was younger, my mom had equipped me with that mantra of, words as seeds. And I was really grateful that one of the seeds my family planted in my life was that I was going to go to Stanford and I was going to become a lawyer. So when I was in third grade and young, like I didn't know how hard it was to get in. I'd never been to California, but I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Stanford. I'm going to be a lawyer, have to speak up for people. So back then, we had the dial-up, and I don't even know, when I was little, we didn't even have dial-up internet. There was no internet. How do you learn about being a lawyer besides those encyclopedias? I would just watch movies. Um, and so I would watch all these movies with lawyers, things I was probably too young to watch, but you know how the aunties did it back then, just letting us watch whatever. But one of the things I watched was this movie called A Few Good Men. And if you've seen it, you know. If you haven't seen it, it has Tom Cruise and this actor Jack Nicholson. And Tom Cruise is this young, naive lawyer. And they picked him as the young, naive lawyer because they wanted to set him up for failure because it's military court. And he's going up against Jack Nicholson. And so Tom Cruise, he's trying to get Jack Nicholson to confess on the stand using all their lawyer tactics. And I'll never forget the part where Tom Cruise says, I want the truth. And Jack Nicholson says, you can't handle the truth. And then Tom Cruise gets him to open up and confess. And I love that part. I would just watch the ending over and over because I really believe like that's how the world worked. Truth and justice went hand in hand. The good guy always wins. Too naive to know, right? That the world still isn't like that for people who look differently or love differently or just show up differently against, the heteronormative ways of the world, against white supremacy. And so I had like harsh lessons that came. And one of those first things happened in third grade. My best friend George and I, he was another Native student, lived right like across like the street from me. We were in those book it competitions to try to win the free pizza. And so we would always read, and see our little race cars go on the top of the classroom, see them get ahead of everybody else as we were reading these books. And we were in the advanced reading group. And, my friend George, he had some health issues that would make him leave school for long periods of time. He also had issues in his family, right? His parents really struggled with their addictions. And sometimes George, even though he was just in third grade, he would stay home to help take care of his parents and his family. So I remember one time he'd missed a period of school. I don't know if it was a week, a month, who knows. But I just remember when he came back to school, he tried to sit back in our advanced reading group. And our teacher, Miss Christensen, she said, George, you've missed too much school. You can't be in this group. You're not smart enough to get caught up. And I remember just thinking like, oh my gosh, like this is my moment. Like this is my lawyer moment. I got to stand up for my friend. And I raise my hand. I say, Miss Christensen, can George please be in our group? He lives right down the street from me. I can help tutor him after school. We can get him caught up. And George and I did everything together. We were thick as thieves. So the teacher, just out of frustration, she just said, Tanea, as soon as I said you and George couldn't be in the same group, I saw wheels a turning. You can't help him. I said he wasn't smart enough to get caught up and be in the group. And I think of this moment often because for me, it was that seed that she had planted in George. And granted, I don't know anything about Miss Christensen. Maybe she was going through a divorce. Maybe she was struggling with her own mental health issues. Maybe she was burnt out. I don't know. But in my mind, then I thought it was one of those, can you handle the truth moments? Like she couldn't handle the truth or didn't take the time to get to know the truth of our community, the things we struggled with. That addiction was a problem that maybe she should have given George more grace. But either way, the consequences of that seed had already planted and started to take root because George had a really difficult time in school after that. And George was so smart, but it really shook his confidence so much so that fast forward to when we're in high school, he didn't want to be in high school, because many of us would leave for sports of our close friend group and he didn't feel comfortable being in school without us. But he went to the alternative school and he did graduate. He did get his GED. He graduated a year earlier than the rest of us. But his confidence and his ability to believe in himself, like so many core things, I think were changed from that seed in third grade being planted. Because George struggled. He had a really hard life, with you know, all those adverse childhood experiences, all those things did lead to him being in and out of the prison system, struggling with his own addictions, and unfortunately to him no longer being here on this earth. And, you know, I look at it as an adult and aware, like I know that, you know, George made his own choices and those choices had their own consequences as those things happen. But I still, like, you know, the human in me, the art worker in me, the artist in me, like has to go back to try to unravel those things. Like where could have been his intervention? Where could have been a powerful pause? And I think in third grade, with that seed being planted, it really did some negative damage. So I always think of George when I'm working with people, when I feel that frustration, when I feel even my own inner Miss Christensen wanting to like pop off at people who frustrate me, to just like calm down and take a beat. Because she did really teach me, you know, that you have to figure out who's in your corner, you have to advocate for yourself, that some people and institutions who are supposed to support you don't always end up doing so. And that's so sad, right? Because if a person has a negative experience with a teacher or with a therapist or with someone who's a service provider, that one negative experience does plant that seed that turns into a weed, and it creates that distrust, right? George didn't trust any teachers after that. Sometimes people don't trust their therapists or other people after things happen. But what I remember most from Miss Christensen was that, wow, like some people will try to place limits on you by telling you words meant to define you, your heart, and your ability. And I share this because, again, like if we think personal transformation tied to social transformation, our self-care tied to our community care, some of that means weeding, right? Weeding the gardens of our heart, mind, and spirit where people have tried to place limits on us. And we're not always aware when those creep up, like in our interactions with people. And for many people, like not just Indigenous people, but Black relatives, like so many people have had seeds planted even before their lifetime, right? I had spoken earlier about my grandmother in boarding school. This is a picture of her in fifth grade in her freshman year when she was in boarding school. And I have to remember those seeds that were planted in her then, because sometimes I struggle with my own sense of feeling like I belong or feeling like I'm worthy. And that manifests like when I am being a workaholic or trying to say yes to everything and take on too much. Sometimes it shows up in workplaces where I want to say yes to every project because I want to feel like I belong, and I have to like unpack that and remind myself like I can live a life of service. I can do all of these things, but I have to see where this is coming from. Is it coming from my healthy place where I do have capacity, or is it coming from this other place where I'm still trying to like undo those weeds of things that have happened to us? And so I always encourage people to think like, yeah, we have to go deeper, right? Because some of those weeds, I hate weeding. If you weed, you know, like some of them, they look really like deep, but you pull it and it comes out so easy. Some of them, it's like you could use your whole, I've used my whole body weight to try to pull one and it won't come out, right? That's like my metaphor of what I think for these weeds that were planted ancestrally in our parents and in our grandparents. You know how they say we're the cycle breakers, we got to be the one to heal it. But so it is a lot of work tending to that garden and figuring out what stays, what serves, what should bloom and blossom, and what should be removed or taken away. That is the hard work of heart work and of self-care, I would say, because when you tend to those wounds and you tend to your garden, it helps make all that we're connected to thrive and be that much stronger. So think about that. You know, am I responding from my wounded place? Am I responding from a place of trauma? Or am I responding from a place of power, from my gifts, from the medicines that I have? Because we know who we are, right? We hold the teachings and lessons we've been taught in our heart. We know the medicines and what medicines do you carry? You know, another way to think of that is your gifts. You know, what gifts do you have? And to make each step intentionally towards love, towards understanding. The next thing I want to talk about is heart first. I had heard once that the longest distance we'll ever have to travel is the 16 inches between our head and our heart. Um, and I think that's because, our head tells us one thing, our heart often tells us another. Sometimes the stories of our head come from that place of trauma or comes from those negative seeds, right? Because people tried to disempower us, and our ancestors tried to remove us from our intuition, from our spirit, from that place of strength where we were most powerful. So sometimes our head tells us one thing, our heart tells us another. I know for me, at a very basic level, my head said, become a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer, like try to do something to be successful, to help provide for your family. And my heart was like, I want to work with people. I want to be a writer. I want to be a poet. I want to be a storyteller. But that wasn't always the viewed as successful in our communities. That wasn't always viewed as something that was needed. And so it took me a long time to get to a place where I could listen to my heart. And I still try to get to that place where I can, again, because sometimes our head tells us another thing, our heart tells us another. Um, but one way to try to reassess that is to come at things from that heart first place. We often say in meetings, like, what's at the top of your mind? What's at the top of your mind? But it's rare that we ever say, what's at the top of your heart? What's on your heart today? How is your heart? What's making your heart happy? So I try to think of that, approaching each day from that heart first place. Another way that I've heard a somatics coach, and if you don't know somatics is again another way to get in your body. I think that's a great way of like getting to that self-care, community care part, right, as well. But she said, think of all the things you hold important to you, all the things you value in your heart, and imagine them just right in front of you, like right in front of your belly button. If that's your parents, if that's family, if that's tradition, if that's your marriage, like whatever you value, if it's right in front of you, imagine it in that empty space in front of your belly button. And if you imagine it there every day, literally every step you take, it will be right in front of you. You will have all those things that you carry in your heart first. So I try to do that to center myself. If I'm going into a meeting or things are getting really hectic, I have to like literally picture what matters, you know, truth, integrity, support, like the things that are in front of me to try to like act and move from that space. I really do believe that storytelling is medicine. Because I had spoken about that longest distance, right? The 16 inches between your head and your heart. But I had heard that the shortest distance between two people is a story. And I love that. I really do believe that. The shortest distance between two people is a story. Because sometimes we make assumptions about each other, or like the youth we work with might make assumptions about each other, but we're making up stories without knowing that person's story. And when you take the time to know that story, to know that person, um, you're making that connection. This is also why I think teaching poetry is so important for young people as well too, because sometimes you'll read a poem the first time and you're like, I have no idea what I read. You have to read it like a second or third time to get the feeling of it or the understanding of it. And I say people are just the same. You get your first impression, but it's like people are like poetry. Like you got to give it a second read, like give people another chance, give people an opportunity. For me, I really found that power of words, and I have some writing prompts to share with you all as well too, because I want you to be able to take some gifts with you if you do like to journal or want to get into it. But I came into the power of words and writing in high school. I grew up in a very small reservation, a very small community where everyone knows everything about each other. And my family, my mom was really big on like respect and privacy and not wanting people to think of us differently because of the things we were going through. So we had to keep things so private. And I felt like, well, who am I going to share? Like, how am I going to share what's going on, what's in my heart? My dad's unhealthiness, like all these things I'm struggling with. Um, and it was finding poetry, but it was a haphazard path to get there, right? My grandfather, who is like my father figure, I don't like to speak too ill of my father because he's done a lot of work and he's in a really good place now, but he was very unhealthy back then, struggling with his own things. So my grandfather was like my stable father figure. He's a cattle rancher in Nevada, and he passed away unexpectedly my senior year in high school. And because I hadn't been taught how to grieve, right? I'm so grateful for the language like we have and the young people have today, right? Like triggers, like trauma, like self-care, like all of these different things. We didn't have that back then when we were growing up, right? So my family didn't talk about those things. I think just out of necessity, right? Like single mother having to just move forward and take care of us. My mom didn't really have time to show us how to feel our feelings. So when my grandfather passed away, I coped the only way I knew how, the only way I saw modeled in my community, which was through drinking and through just I fell into that path. I had enough credits to graduate early. So I dropped out of school. I was working as a waitress at my tribe's casino at the time. And I thought I'll just do this because I love serving people. Like I'll just do that. Um, and it took me a couple weeks before I realized, okay, I can't throw away what I've literally been working my whole life for. Like the plan was always go to college, go to Stanford. My grandpa was the main one who wanted me to go there. I have to honor his memory. So I decide to go back to school. My school also, for context, just had like a rotating door of principals. So the principal wouldn't have known me, wouldn't have known like my grades or my situation. Um, and our school just had like racial tension as well because I grew up on a checkerboard reservation. So anyway, I come back to school. I asked the principal, can I come back to school? I know I've been gone a few weeks, but I'd like to come back. And him not knowing that I was going to be either salutatorian or valedictorian, that I had a 4.0, not taking the time to look it up, just saw me as the native person that I was and said, you're too far behind. There's no way you're going to get caught up. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, like I've heard the same thing, like said to my friend back in third grade 9 years ago. Um, and so, but this time I know those lessons, right? Advocate for yourself. So I go to the high school counselor, this awesome white woman, this amazing ally. She agrees to advocate for me on behalf of for the principal. She gets him to agree. If I could get at least one teacher to let me into their class that late in the semester, I could come back to school. And the only teacher willing to let me back into school that late in the semester was Mr. B. And he was teaching a spoken word poetry class. And I didn't know if I wanted to do it, right? I've always been that shy, awkward introvert, even though I'm telling you stories now, even though I do this for a living, I still am one of those introverted people. But I was like, how am I going to do this? Like the finals to perform in a poetry slam. But I thought, okay, this is one of those moments you got to stretch into your discomfort because this is the only way to get what I need. And I'm so grateful I did, because that is where I learned that storytelling was medicine, poetry was medicine, because I could write all of the things I was feeling that my mother didn't want me to share. I could write about my grief, about my father, about how I felt. And that was allowing that trauma to move through me. Even now, I try to journal just every day. And that's why I want to share some prompts with you all, because I really do believe getting out your thoughts and just seeing what's in your heart through journaling is so helpful. It's such good medicine. And I'm really grateful for that experience because I always joke like with students that I'm working with, because they are obsessed with being the best at something, right? I say, you'd think I would have, I sit before you like I have multiple books. What my book is in the largest library in the world, some consider it, in the British libraries in London. I've done book tours. I'm a published poet. So it could be a cool story if I said, at the end of that class, I won the poetry slam and everyone celebrated me. And that's how I knew I was going to be a poet and a storyteller. But I was a horrible spoken word poet. I didn't even place in that poetry slam. I didn't even make it to the next round. I just did my one poem and I was done. But I like that better, right? Because for the first time in my life, it wasn't about being good. It wasn't about being great because I wasn't even good. It was just about how poetry made me feel. So whether it's young people or adults or elders, I try to get people to think for your self-care. Don't just think what you're good at, but what do you want to be good at? Because so many of us were just told, like me, you were good at arguing, so become a lawyer. but no one ever said with that heart first, right? Like, what makes your heart happy? What do you want to be good at? Because I would have said storytelling, I would have said music. Eventually, I found my way there through healing and self-care. But sometimes it does take a while. So I'm grateful for Mr. B for letting me in that poetry class, because he taught me that hope and healing can come from unexpected places. And if you yourself are in need of hope and healing, be open to that unexpected place, whatever your belief system is. Sometimes even just saying, universe, I need this, I'm ready, bring it to me. Mr. B also taught me that someone else can offer you the tools to heal yourself, but only you hold the power to use them. I hope, and I put out in the universe one day, I had a Spanish teacher who knew I was drinking in high school, knew I was struggling. And like, you know, when you're a teenager and people try to help you, I just was rude and then and an awful teenager, because I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to know, even though I was not weirdly, even though I was doing those things for a cry for help, and he saw my cry for help, but I just wasn't ready. I would like to thank him one day if I ever meet him again. But Mr. B showed me, like, he gave me those tools and I picked it up. So for any of you who are giving tools and resources and people aren't picking them up just yet, just to have that grace for yourself, because they will pick them up, and it might not be now. You might not get to see the blossoming of those seeds you're planting, but you'll get it one day. You will. And I think some people are sharing out too, like how sometimes you do get to see the benefits of your seeds. So I'm really grateful. A few years ago, one of my cousins was graduating high school, and the keynote speaker just so happened to be Mr. B. I don't know if he remembers me or not, but he was acted like he did, which is nice. So my sister and I went up to him, and I just said thank you. I said, I don't even know if I said it then, but thank you for letting me in your class. Thank you for giving me this gift of poetry, because I have used it. I did get to go to Stanford. I did get to go to college, and I'm like a published poet, and I never would have thought that happened. So I'm always grateful for that. And I'll put that in the universe for you all, that if you have planted seeds, I hope that somebody gets to come back to you and thank you for the planting and growth that you did. Um, and you know, with all that healing, like I really felt like I was healing with writing and poetry. And I used to think like, you know, healing, one day you're just like, I'm healed, enough therapy, enough stuff, like I'm healed. I didn't know that it was this process, this daily practice that you have to work on, right? I also didn't know that what I wish someone had told me when I was young was like, it doesn't matter how successful you are, you can't outrun your trauma, right? Because those things will always catch up. So you know, I went to Stanford. I thought I was living this dream and I was living the dream, but I didn't realize I brought all that unprocessed trauma with me, historical, personal, familial. And it came up. It came up in different moments of impact, you know, still struggling with drinking in college before I found my sobriety, even though I had poetry, having now friends who also struggled with things in this high pressure environment. I don't want to speak too much about that, but I did end up losing a friend to suicide in college, which really rocked me, like this glass shattering, right? You have to put yourself back together in a new mosaic. Like sometimes that's what happens. Um, I have heard like different ways and different like spiritual ways of these things happening, right? Like sometimes you do experience that suffering, whether it is in ceremonies or other things that help get you to that place of seeing how to put yourself back together. Um, Even in the Bible, right? They say like there's blessings in the breaking. You know, when I had heard a talk where they were talking about how when Jesus broke the bread and turned it into all the bread and fish to feed all the loaves, other people, they said he couldn't have done that without the bread breaking. And that's like a metaphor for life too, right? Sometimes from the breaking comes the blessing. For me, in that breaking, the blessing was figuring out how to put myself back together, because I decided not to be a lawyer. I wanted to work with people. I wanted to work with youth. So I went back to my community, started teaching poetry, just really started grounding myself in those things. In my community, we call it caring for the circle. That's our way of talking about community care. When we pray, we think of people and pray, like we say, I'm praying for people from the doorway in to the doorway out. Because when we sit in that circle, No one's left behind, no one's forgotten. And so when I'm teaching kids about this community care, I say, remember the circle, like we each have a place in it. Somebody in the circle might be autistic and maybe they can't handle like loud noises. And it shouldn't always be on them to advocate for themselves. Like we are all in this circle. You can say, hey, you guys, let's quiet down. Like so and so isn't good with the loud noises, or telling the teacher, like, hey, I think it's getting too loud. Like, how are we thinking of that? For adults, I think it's another version of thinking of that diversity, equity, inclusion. How are we caring for the circle? How are we taking care of that space, even from the doorway into the doorway out? And so with that, um, once I had that, I feel like that's the blessing that I got from that breaking, was putting myself back together in this circle that, unfortunately, being in the school I was in, I think was really individualistic and took me away from that community centric. And I often have to feel like reprogram parts of myself, but it led to some really beautiful places, being able to work with youth, work with community. All in all, to just say, figuring out how to turn pain into power. In the same way Earth transforms those seeds into something, right? Like, how can we turn and transform our pain into power? How can we turn and transform those breakings into blessings? For me, I like to just think of this like saying, ground yourself in all that you hold sacred. For me, it's family, ceremony, tradition, medicine, and love. Plant your feet on the earth that birthed you. Then stand strong in your ancestral knowing that is where you belong, connected, strong, beautiful, and worthy. So that's another self-care. I'm sure you all have heard it too, but like, just go out and stand on the earth. It's hard sometimes in cities where we're just around a bunch of like cement and streets, but finding a park, finding a place to just put your feet on the earth and like feel connected and tethered in that way. Ask Mother Earth to take from you what no longer serves you, because she can transform it into something. Stand by a tree, lean against a tree. I think there have been studies from the Heart Math Institute that if you just stand by a tree for 10 minutes and talk to it about the problems and stresses and things you're going through, that you will feel better. Like, it has improved people's blood pressure and things like that. Because I really do believe in the power of seeds. The words we speak over our hearts, our bodies, and our minds are the keys to unlocking our path to healing and liberation. And it is hard, right? Like, there is that fear too. Like, some of us were so used to, I know this is me, I was so used to just being in my anxiety and like, drinking however many cups of coffee a day. Like, I thought I needed that to work. And it was only when I, you know, made the extreme choice to switch to decaf that I realized, like, oh, I'm actually not as anxious as I thought I was. It's the coffee. So decaf and tea. But fear, it's a real thing, right? Like, fear and worry, anxiety. So I had to stop being afraid of fear. And so I started to think of fear in this way: fiercely embrace ancestral resilience. Because when I feel afraid, I want to think of my grandmother. She survived so much, and she didn't have a phone to GPS her way around. She didn't have internet. She just had her faith and her prayer. And she came out through the other side of boarding school, of her experiences. She came out still loving and kind and had her strength of spirit. I had heard that once, right? It doesn't, people can touch you with their words or their hands, but nothing touches your spirit. Like, your spirit is always whole, your spirit is always sacred. So I wanted to think of fear in that new way: fiercely embrace ancestral resilience. Think of my ancestors, think of what they've gone through, and let it like embrace me like a hug when I feel that fear. So we're getting down to the end of heart work, and then I'll play a song and we'll have time for questions. But heart work, living your heart, it's your heart's work. It's that seed creator or God or the universe planted. It's that seed that was planted in your heart. That's your heart's work. Some of us spend our whole lives trying to find our purpose. Some of us know what it is early on, and it is hard work. But it is the medicine that you carry. We talked about words being seeds, and the medicine is in the seed. earlier this year, I got to visit the Show Paiute Reservation in Oahe. One of the elders made us this choke cherry pudding. And she said, I keep the seeds in it. Some people take out the seeds because it's bitter or it messes up the texture. She said, I keep the seed because that's where the medicine is. And it literally is. Like, a story from that school actually did a study, I think with the University of Utah, that shows that the seed from that choke cherry actually inhibits certain types of cancer cells from growing. So again, like our earth, our plants, our plant relatives, and plant medicine just has so much offerings and teaching for us. So if the medicine is in the seed and you're using words as seeds, like what medicine are you putting in the world? What medicine are you sharing with yourself, with your family, with your loved ones? So I'm going to give you a journaling prompt. I don't know that we'll have the time to journal, but you'll have these slides. You'll have the recording. I'll make sure that you're able to have the slides as well, but just to spend time like reflecting on that, right? Like, what gifts, what medicine do you bring? I like the word medicine, but if you don't feel comfortable with it, you can use gifts. You know, who needs the medicine you bring? Why does your community, family, or network need the gifts or medicines you bring? And how can you share the gifts or the medicine you've been given? Sometimes when I'm on the brink of burnout or really struggling with like, am I in the right job? What am I doing? I'll journal to these questions over and over, like once a month, and I'll get different answers each time. So I want you to all have that, to be able to just think and reflect on that. You know, what medicines do you bring? And when you think about the medicines you bring, to make sure to leave room for the blessings, right? The way my trauma presents is I like to be over prepared and I'm really controlling. So I used to have like a flood kit, a fire kit, extra change of clothes, all this stuff in my trunk. So when I pack on trips, I am like that too, especially in winter. This is a trip when I was going to a reservation in South Dakota. I was like, I got to pack extra in case there's a blizzard, I get stuck. And I don't like to check a bag. So I have packed my carry-on to the brim of like pushing it and zipping it closed. And when I get there, I didn't even think, oh, maybe they might give me a gift. They gave me a blanket, a beautiful blanket, and it's big. And I was just like, oh, I'm so grateful for the blessing. But I thought, how am I gonna take this back on the plane? Are they gonna let me wrap myself? And it's my jacket. I don't know. I was able to figure it out. I had to just wear a bunch of my clothes so the blanket could fit in my bag. But I thought, oh, Creator's teaching me. I don't even leave room for blessings because I'm so set in my schedule. I feel like the pandemic changed this for us, right? I feel like I had so much more emergent time in my calendar before, but now it's literally Zoom, 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 meeting, meeting. And it's like, I'm not leaving room for Creator or blessings. Like, what if somebody needs me, or like, you know, maybe my neighbor is going through a tough time and invites me on a walk outside and needed me, and I can't just say yes because I have this overpacked schedule. So in your self-care and community care journeys, just thinking, how are you leaving room for the blessings? And to make sure that if you struggle with control like me, to try to go more with the flow. You know, find the wise warrior within. When we're calm and in our bodies, you know, you hear it. Some people think it's your gut. Some people think it's your intuition. I think it's my ancestor, wise warrior version of myself telling me what to do. But if you calm and pause, you hear it. Find that wise warrior within. Let your ancestors offer you wisdom. Open your heart to the message, right? Sometimes we hear and know what we're supposed to do, but we're like choosing not to do it. But, you know, open your heart to the message and welcome the lessons and the blessings that they bring. Because powerful things can happen when we do things like that. You know, it opens it up to, we don't know, like you don't know what kind of blessing is waiting for you when you open yourself up to it. One of the first times I was visiting a school, a younger school, a lot of my content I feel like is PG-13, so I didn't know what to read or talk to the young ones about. So I said, well, tell me what you want me to write, and next time I come to your school, I'll write it. And this little boy came up to me at lunch and he said, can you write about someone going through a tough time and that things will get better towards the end? That would mean a lot. Thanks. And I think that's what we all want and know, right? We know people who go through tough times and that things will get, and they want to know that things will get better towards the end. But each and every one of us has that medicine, has that gift to be the person who gives that hope to show that things will get better in the end. And I think a lot of it can be through sharing your story, sharing your stories with those you work with, whether it's youth or your colleagues or your family. You never know who needs to hear the words you have to say. I tell the young ones, like, you don't have to have thousands of TikTok or Instagram followers to make a difference. Like, literally just the person next to you might need to hear your words. So when you think about your heart work and letting it lead you to help with that self-care, that community care, what seeds will you plant with your words and actions and relationships? How will you lead heart first? And to let your heart work lead you to create those sacred spaces for connection, belonging, and healing. And so grateful for that sacred space that's been created today for people. And to close out here before my song, I'm just going to share a short story that comes from my mother's homeland, the Pyramid Lake Paiute Reservation. And this is a picture of the Stone Mother. She's naturally occurring like that. She's not man-made. And she's made out of tufa rock, or that's what she was created about. And this is a saltwater lake in the middle of the desert. And they say that the lake was created from her tears, that the original man and original woman had 4 children. And when they were little, they got along. But as they got older, they would fight and argue and bicker. And the parents said, if you guys keep fighting, I'm going to separate you. And then sure enough, as we humans do, they keep fighting and arguing and bickering. So they said, all right, I'm going to send 2 of you to the north, 2 of you to the south. When you get to where you're going, make sure you light your fire so that we know you're okay. Days pass, time passes. They see a fire lit in one direction, but they never see a fire lit in the other direction. And because they didn't see that fire lit, that's why the mother cried so many tears. She created that lake and turned to stone because she didn't know if her kids were okay. I used to project a lot of my anger onto this stone mother, right? Because I thought, how selfish, like just crying and being made of stone. And I felt anger towards her because growing up, I had a lot of those adverse childhood experiences, right? I experienced a lot of loss. And I got to the point where I thought I was made of stone. Like, was that what I inherited? Because I got to the point where I couldn't cry, just being so self-protective, like I couldn't feel what I was feeling. But, over time, I was swimming in this lake, probably in my early 20s. And I thought, if I believe the story, and I do, I'm literally swimming in my ancestors' tears right now. I'm literally swimming in tears. And isn't that kind of a metaphor for life? Because unfortunately, we'll all know pain, we'll all know sadness, but how do you not drown in it? And then I just felt such gratitude for the Stone Mother because I thought she really sacrificed herself to give our people a tool to navigate healing so we could learn how to swim through our tears so we wouldn't drown in it. And that you could, if you were too tired to swim, you could tread water or you could float on your back and figure out which direction to keep swimming in or how to keep going. And so I just felt such gratitude for that lesson and teaching. And I returned to the story and I thought about the part where she wanted her kids to light their fire so that she knew they were okay. And I think all of our ancestors want us to light our fire while we're here on earth so that they know we're okay. So as part of your self-care, as part of your community care, just to think, what does igniting your fire mean to you? It could mean being a good worker, a good advocate, could mean being a good auntie, good uncle, good parent, good relative. It could mean so many different things. And part of it, I think, is planting those seeds of positivity, is sharing your gifts and sharing your medicine. Because of that, I no longer think of that God-shaped hole, that creator-shaped hole. I don't think of it anymore as something that needs to be filled, like filled with things. I think that hole is there because it's not meant to be filled, but it's meant to be filled. Like we're meant to feel that God-shaped hole. Because for me, that's where my storytelling comes from. That's where I feel like I'm able to connect with others. That's where my poetry or my music comes from. So if you need to, as part of you taking care of yourself, call your spirit back. I've been fortunate to visit many different tribes, many different nations, and most have something about calling yourself back. Use that creator-shaped hole in your heart to bring light into this world that desperately needs love. Ignite your fire so that your ancestors know that you are here, alive, breathing, dancing, singing, and being all that they prayed for. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm just going to play a song for you all on my guitar. We'll see how it turns out. When there's a lot of people on the Zoom, sometimes it sounds kind of wild, but how it goes. And if not, I do have some music on Spotify that you can check out later. But I'm going to share with you all this song called The Tuteveyak. It's a good day. So hopefully y'all can hear it. Woke up this morning to greet the day. Lit my sage to give thanks and began to pray. Hey, I asked Creator, do what you can to guide my path. That's all I ask. To it's a good day. Yeah, hard to tell. Ancestors, please protect my spirit. Those I hold dearest in my heart. If there are wounds, help me heal them, so others know love even for a minute. To their young, it's a good day. Young, hard to tell. Hey, so that was Tuteveyak. So I'll see if folks have questions now. If not, I do have more songs if that was able to come through. Okay. But thank you all for listening, for being here, for the work you do, for seeing value in all of it.
So aside from just a bunch of gratitude, statements of gratitude, I do see one question in the chat from Wendy. She's wondering if she could please get a link for the PowerPoint used today. It helps with my notes and I can present to our ICW committee and lots of great information. And then again, lots of heartfelt gratitude.
Thank you. Yeah, and they do have a copy of my PowerPoint. I usually just remove the slide with my grandmother because she'd probably be like, "Why are you sending my picture everywhere?" But other than that, it's good to be shared.
Julie asked, your session was amazing. In what tribe are you working?
Yeah, so I actually work for a nonprofit right now that's based in the Hasapa in the Black Hills, Rapid City, the Indian Collective. So we work with different tribes, But that's my main job. But on the side, what my true passion is this. You know, I'm very lucky to get to visit different tribes and universities and organizations throughout the country. I just go wherever I'm booked. Sometimes I'll do writing workshops, sometimes I'll do music performances or talks like this, but so not one particular tribe, although I try to go home as much as I can to work with my tribe, the community I was raised in Southern Ute and Duckwater, where I'm enrolled. Yeah, what wisdom would you share with people who feel like they have been planting seeds and feel discouraged when they're not flourishing? Yeah, I feel like people who plant the seeds and they're not flourishing, sometimes I feel like those are the most powerful people, or the most powerful like seeds that are yet to come. I feel like for me, I'll just speak from my personal, like from my heart, like I feel like when I'm in a place like that and I'm planting seeds and I'm not seeing them flourish, I often have to like reflect, like, what is this trying to teach me? And for me, and it might be something for you, when different for you if you ask that question, what is this trying to teach me? But for me, it's usually like, okay, there are times when I've planted seeds and I get to see them grow right away, and I like get so happy. And it's almost like my faith, not just in myself, but in like what Creator's given me, gets like too hyped up, you know, I might take it for granted. And when the seeds aren't flourishing, then for me, it's like, okay, I feel like I really need, this is my moment to like deepen my faith. I'm being asked to deepen my faith, because even though I can't see what's blossoming or how it's going to blossom like I'm usually able to, I still have to have that faith. So I often think of those moments as an invitation to like deepen my faith. And sometimes I think when there is something coming against us, or like the seeds aren't flourishing or growing for whatever reason, I do believe that sometimes like the balance or the power of things, like I feel like it's meant to be something really powerful if it's not allowed to flourish now, and that I just have to keep pushing through. So I hope that answers a little bit of your question. But if you did get discouraged, like let yourself feel it, but then move through it, you know, to keep planting or figure out new strategies, or have people plant seeds with you. Because I do believe that the seeds you plant have value. Yeah, like
We
Sam,
have
yeah.
a few more questions. Can you share the name of your books with us and a few of the names of songs that you have on Spotify?
Yeah, one of my books is Words Like Love. That's the University of New Mexico Press. That's poetry. Why Storms Are Named After People and Bullets Remain Nameless. This one's available on Amazon, also poetry. Words to Love by is like positive affirmations. That's on Amazon too. I just signed my first contract for my first children's book. It's going to be called Thanks for Loving Me Too. Or no, it's called I Tell You That I Love You. But it has to do with this concept of like thanking for loving, even though like we make mistakes. So those are the books that are out now. Spotify, I have a song out called Pray for You. So if you do work with youth, and like sometimes you get to that point, right, where it's like I literally don't know what else I can do. Like but pray. Like there's nothing I can do to change the situation but prayer. I wrote this song called Pray for You for that. That's on there. But I'm my first full music album will be out by December. So if you just remember to check back and look on Spotify, or follow me on Instagram or something, I'll be announcing it. But I'm so excited for that one. There's a song to call your spirit back. There's a song I wrote about loss when my grandma passed away called Rest Easy. There's that song, Thanks for Loving Me. the one you all just heard, It's a Good Day. So I'm really excited when that one comes out.
Can you share about the writing workshops and how we get more information on that?
Yeah, so you can just email me if you want to set up a writing workshop. One thing I've been doing is working with the University of Iowa's Native American Alaska Native Trauma Center to do a whole Writing to Heal curriculum. It's about 90 pages of just different grounding, breathing exercises, and writing prompts. So if you email me, that will be available for everybody for free. So if you want to use it for your own journaling prompts, the idea of it is to walk through anybody to be able to like hold a space and lead like a writing workshop for your colleagues or for youth groups or for behavioral health. And that like walks through like just there's so many prompts, like you could probably have a whole year of like writing circles for that. But that will be available next month. Just finishing the revisions on it. But sometimes I do writing workshops through Zoom. And so I'll probably be doing those again this winter.
That's all the questions that I see in the chat. Unless we have any last minute questions to drop those in now.
I was wondering if you guys could put the PowerPoint link in the chat.
We will post the PowerPoint on the OTR training website with any of the PowerPoints that were shared in the last 2 days. Those will be available with the on our OTR training website, as well as the recordings of the presentation. So you'll have access to all of that. Everybody that gave us permission to share their PowerPoints. We just need a little bit of time to, I'm not going to say a date because I can see Danica's page still here. So I'm not going to make up how quick that can happen, but it will be within the next couple weeks.
Yeah, a couple of the other presenters had their PowerPoints and it was easier to take notes so I could present it to our committee and my coworker, because there's 2 ICWs here. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, no problem. We'll have that available for you, for everybody. Any final questions? Well, Tanea, thank you so much for your time. And I'm such a fan. I had the opportunity to listen to Tanea speak in Boise earlier this summer. Well, it's fall now, but in the summertime. And Empower just blew me away. And again today, the same exact thing. So I'm so honored that we got to have you here to share your story with us and your hard work. And I think it just really resonates with a lot of the work that we all do in serving our tribal communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Cassie. I appreciate you.
And that's it, you guys. We know that it is not